morning. We're in Yeshaya. We're up to Perek Chaf Daled, chapter 24. We're on page 178 of the Art Scroll, Yeshaya. We've been learning a lot of prophecies of Yeshaya with respect to other nations, the fall of other nations, and those prophecies usually begin with the word Masa. You go back to, for example, page 172, chapter 23, the chapter begins Masa Tzor, a prophecy about Tyre. The word Masa, as we've explained many times, Masa means a burden, to carry something, a heavy thing. When a prophecy is introduced with the word Masa, it means it's going to be a burdensome nevuah that is going to prophesize about the downfall or the ruination of a country, of a nation. Interestingly, Perek Chaf Daled does not begin with the word Masa, because Perek Chaf Daled, although it is a prophecy of destruction and ruination, and is quite a traumatic perek to read because it deals with a prophecy of the Gog Umagog war, where there'll be worldwide strife and the nations will gather against Yerushalayim. And you would imagine that this perek would begin with the word Masa, since there's a tremendous amount of destruction described in the parsha, in this perek. Nevertheless, it does not begin with Masa, because by the time the perek ends, the following perek begins, Perek Chaf Hei. The Yeshaya is prophesying about the rise of the Jewish people, the defeat of Gog and Magog and B'Yameinu, and all the wonderful times that will happen after the defeat of Gog and Magog. So while the preparatory stages, as we called it before Purim, remember we talked about the preparatory stages, as we go through certain stages, they feel to us disastrous, and that's because we live in past, present, and future. And in the present, we feel, Loyalenu, a disastrous event is a disaster. But Purim taught us that there's a new way to look at the world, and we take that with us the whole year. Purim taught us, Rav Hutner, we read the Pachad Yitzhak, Rav Hutner says that Sapir Yeshua, one of the 6 questions that the Ribbono Shalom asks after 120 years is Sapir Yeshua. Rashi and Shabbos and Daf Lamed Aleph comments that Sapir Yeshua means, did you in your lifetime look forward to the words of the Nevi'im coming true? In other words, were you looking for the ultimate were you looking forward with a passion and a desire for the ultimate salvation of Mashiach to come? What did you do to bring about the ultimate salvation? The Chidush Yarim, the first Ger Rebbe, who was nifter in approximately 1860, something around there, he said, and it's brought down in his Sefer, that every Yid should be concerned about the fact that Mashiach may be ready to come at any second, and it's something that he did, that he said, that he thought is stopping Mashiach from coming. So imagine if Mashiach was about to come and all the Jewish people would have that salvation, and the whole world, that perfectly imperfect world, would be perfected. And there's a Yid or 2 or 3 that by their conduct or their omissions, Mashiach can't come. Imagine, God forbid, having to be blamed for such a world-shattering disaster. So every Yid has to think to himself, what am I doing to bring Mashiach closer? making sure that I'm not doing anything to keep him more distant. Of course, one of the things that we all know keep him very distant, unfortunately, is the act of sinas chinam, which is a subject in itself. People need to be concerned about sinas chinam because that is one of the things that chas v'sholom, unfortunately, for 2,000 years, has delayed the coming of Mashiach. The second Beis Hamikdash was destroyed because of sinas chinam. That too ties itself to the Purim miracle, which we're not going to discuss right now, but the Maharal talks about it. And the bottom line of the Maharal is that the foundation of the second Beis Hamikdash was Ahavas Yisrael. In other words, what the Maharal is explaining is we always think about sinas chinam being the sin, because the sin is so severe, which it is so severe that it caused the Churban Beis Hamikdash. So when we talk about the first Beis Hamikdash, we say the first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed because of Avodah Zorah, Gili Arayis, and Shvichas Damim, murder, idol worship, and immoral relationships between men and women. And that's the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. The second Beis Hamikdash was destroyed because of sinas chinam. And this is a Gemara in Yuma Daf Tes Amud Beis. The Gemara then equates sinas chinam, which brought down the second Beis Hamikdash, with the three major sins of Avodah Zorah, Gilui Arayis, Shvichas Damim, which brought down the first Beis Hamikdash. And the Maharal adds a little deeper understanding to what the Gemara is saying. The second Beis Hamikdash, the foundation of the second Beis Hamikdash was Ahavas Yisrael. It was the love of Jew for another Jew that made the foundation. It literally was the thing that built the second Beis Hamikdash. And the second Beis Hamikdash, we know, is built after the 70 years of the exile of Bavel, and the Purim miracle happened all the way at the end of the 70 years. And that's why Achashverosh at his party took out the clothing of the Kohen Gadol. The Babylonians had ransacked the Beis Hamikdash. They took the clothing of the Kohen Gadol. They took many vessels from the Beis Hamikdash and they took it back to Babylon. When the Persians and the Medes, the Medes, they defeated Babylonians. They took the Kohen Gadol's clothing and they took the vessels of the temple from the Beis Hamikdash that Babylon had captured. They took it from Babylon. They brought it to Persia. And Achashverosh didn't want to dress up in the big day Kohen Gadol, and he did not want to use the vessels of the Beis Hamikdash because he was scared, until he made a calculation that the 70 years of Golus Bavel is over, and he miscalculated. He was off. This is a Gemara in Megillah, Daf Yud Aleph Amud Beis. Achashverosh calculated the 70 years of Bavel. And when he realized the 70 years of Bavel were over and the second Beis Hamikdash has not been built, there's no Redeemer, he said, oh, God has forsaken the Jewish people. There is no second Beis Hamikdash. It's over. The Jewish people are over. And therefore, chas v'sholom, and therefore he was comfortable in taking out the clothing of the Kohen Gadol and the vessels of the Beis Hamikdash. He used it at his party, and that really was his downfall, because he used the big day Kohen Gadol and the vessel of Beis Hamikdash. That begins the downfall. So the miracle of Purim occurs at the end of the 70 years of Golus of Bavel. And through the miracle of Purim, as we discussed before Purim, the Jewish people had to unite. Haman said, Am mafuzar u'meforad. This is a nation that is completely on disconnect. There is no achdus between them. That's what Haman said, mafuzar meforad. And Esther said, when she was asked by Mordechai to go speak to the king, before she went to speak to Achashverosh, she said to Mordechai, Lech kinosis kol hayudim. Gather the Jewish people together, create an actus, and they have to fast together as a nation for 3 days. So the Maharal explained that the miracle of Purim, which comes right before the building of the second Beis Hamikdash, occurs through a lech kinosis kol hayudim, bring the Jews together, bring them an achdus, and through the celebration of Purim, we have all kinds of mitzvahs where we're told to take care of one another. Mishloach manos, matanos levyonim, bring people together for a suda. This is all to create the sense of achdus, because that was the foundation of the miracle of Purim, and the foundation of that miracle of Purim is what now becomes the foundation of the second Beis Hamikdash. When the Jews, unfortunately, fell to sinas chinam wasn't just a severe sin, the Maharal explains, it was more than that. The second Beis Hamikdash foundation was loving each Jew loving another Jew, each Jew caring about another Jew. That was the foundation upon which it was built. The Aveira of hating another Jew, sinas chinam, was not just now a severe sin, it was people taking out bulldozers and bulldozing the very foundation of the second Beis Hamikdash. The very foundation of the second Beis Hamikdash comes off the Purim miracle, which is Achdus, and sinas chinam bulldozed the Beis Hamikdash. So the Maharal is telling us it's not just the severity of sinas chinam, it's much deeper than that. Sinas chinam literally dug away, bulldozed the foundation of the second Beis Hamikdash that was built on Avas Yisrael. So we're going to now have prophecies that describe world chaos, and not just world chaos in our time, but the unraveling of world order with the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. If you remember, we talked many weeks ago, the Jewish people, we read it in Yeshaya, the Jewish people, when they heard about the prophecy from Yeshaya that the first Beis Hamikdash would be destroyed, they didn't take him seriously. They did not believe that the Ribono Shel Olam would allow Goyim to come into, quote unquote, his house, the Beis Hamikdash. The Jews didn't believe that because of their sins, whatever they were, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would allow Goyim to trample in his Beis Hamikdash and burn it down. It's not something that can happen. God's not allowed, again, no matter what Jewish people do, God is not going to allow a Goy to trample the Beis Hamikdash. But they were wrong. Yeshaya warned them, if that's what you're relying on, you are wrong. And with the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash comes a unraveling of the world order. It's not just the first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. The whole world is affected by the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. And all the chaos that we see in the world, Rafutner talks about this, all the chaos that we see in the world through today is all an offspring of the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. Now, the second Beis Hamikdash, the Mefarshim talk about, Rishonim talk about it. It was a pause. A pause means that the Ribono Shel Olam, after 70 years of the Golus of Bavel, gave the Jews a Beis Hamikdash that basically was known in advance that was going to be destroyed. And we're going to talk about this in Yet Hashem next week, on Thursday in the Shemitah, in the Masechta Shvi'ah Shir, in the Shemitah Shir, when we learn the Rambam and the Raavad. We're going to see the Raavad Shita, where he talks about at the time they built the second Beis Hamikdash, they knew it wasn't going to be a permanent Beis Hamikdash. And how did they know that? We've spoken about this many times. Because Yecheskel, who lived at the time of the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash, before the destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash, he has prophecies which are recorded in Sefer Yecheskel about what the third Beis Hamikdash will look like. Why is he prophesying about the third Beis Hamikdash when there is the second Beis Hamikdash? The answer to that is it was known that the second Beis Hamikdash was an interlude. It was a pause. The Ribono Shel Olam knew that the Jewish people were not ready for a very extended exile after the 70 years of Bavel. They needed a pause. They needed a second Beis Hamikdash. It is during the second Beis Hamikdash that we have the development of Torah Sheba Al Peh, the Tanoim. Later, after the destruction, we have the Amoraim. During the second Beis Hamikdash, at the beginning of the second Beis Hamikdash, we still have Anshe Knesset Hagdola who established the Shmona Esrei, Kiddush, Havdolah, brachas on food, all the basic components of Yiddishkeit, Tefillah, etc., were set into motion by the Anshe Knesset Hagdola. So in order to prepare Jewish people for an extended Golus, the potential for an extended Golus, Mashiach can come any moment, but to prepare the Jewish people for the potential of an extended Golus, the Ribono Shel Olam said the Ribono Shel Olam gave the Jewish people the second Beis Hamikdash, during which time they can come back together, and there'll be an Anshe Knesset Hagdola at the beginning to establish brachas, kiddush, havdolah, tefillah. There'll be the full development of Torah Sheba'al Peh through the Tanoim and later the Amoraim. And now the Jewish people have a firm grasp on Torah and Halacha, and now they will go into Golus with a Torah behind them and with a Torah with them. And at any moment, Mashiach can come. But the second Beis Hamikdash was a preparatory stage for the potential of an extended Golus. So with the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, gets set into motion world chaos. The first Beis Hamikdash, especially during the days of Shlomo, those 40 years of Shlomo, the Jewish people were looked upon as the world leaders. Foreign kings, foreign queens came to Eretz Yisrael to offer karbonos to the Ribono Shel Olam. Foreign kings and foreign queens came to meet with Shlomo and talk to him. He was considered the wisest man. The Queen of Sheba, we learned about it, the Queen of Sheba came to Eretz Yisrael to meet Shlomo HaMelech. And so there was a certain type of understanding of the status of the Jewish people, the centrality of Judaism to the world, the centrality of the Beis Hamikdash to the world. And so the world had a certain order. People don't like that word today, world order. But there was a certain world order. After the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, the world went into complete chaos and has been getting worse and worse since. So let's begin with Perek Chaf Daled, and we'll take a look at one of the notes which summarizes what we just spoke about. Perek Chaf Daled, let's take a look at the first pasuk. Very difficult words. Page 178. Hine Hashem bokek. Bokek doesn't sound like a good word. It sounds like destruction, and it is. Bokek ha'aretz. Ubalka. So if you take a look on page 179 in the art scroll, towards the bottom of the page, in the right-hand column of the art scroll, towards the bottom, there are two words, bokek, bolka, emptying and destroying. Remember, when we read Sefer Yeshaya, this is Yeshaya speaking. So Yeshaya stood up in public and said, Hine Hashem bokek ha'aretz, ubalka. These sound like harsh words. And so the art scroll comments, the forceful sounds of many of the prophet's words cannot be reproduced in a translation. Bokek means to empty. Bolka means to destroy. God's going to empty countries. He's going to destroy countries. So when you say it in English, destroy, empty, okay, we're used to saying those words. But the word bokek, bolka, escapes a real translation. These are frightening words. And the art scroll continues, one can only imagine the effect of their explosive sounds had on the listener. So Yeshaya is getting up and saying, Bokek, Bolka. You should understand that there's going to be mass destruction coming with the Churban of the Beis HaMikdash. So let's take a look at page 179 at the top. Behold, Hashem is emptying the land and destroying it. He will distort its appearance and scatter its inhabitants. Let's take a look on page 179, the art scroll, the introduction to this chapter. It's right below the number 24. After foretelling the severe fate that will meet the wealthy city of Tyre and its commercial partners, that was chapter 23, the destruction of Tyre, Yeshaya foresees events that will affect the future of many other nations. Now this is chapter 24, is a prophecy that's going to affect many nations, cause destruction, chaos, ruination. He begins with a dire prophecy about the future of the Jewish people, regarding which there are various interpretations. According to Rashi, this prophecy describes events pertaining to the war of Gog and Magog, the final war before the coming of the Mashiach. Although the prophecy ends with glad tidings for the Jewish people, at the end of the war, we have very good Besuras Taivas for Klal Yisrael, and the Jewish people will then have the period of Mashiach, etc. Yeshaya tells his contemporaries they will not see it. It will happen with the final redemption. So the chaos and the destruction that's being prophesied here deals with the Jewish people, unfortunately. It deals with many other nations. It's ruination and worldwide chaos that will happen over time. We now go down in the art scroll explanation, verse 1, we just read that. The second paragraph. In a novel interpretation, Rav Schwab suggests that the prophet may be referring to worldwide catastrophes over millennia. And this is what we were talking about earlier. The parak that we're dealing with now, Parak Kaf Dalet, is a prophecy of not a specific period of time. It's not a prophecy like in Parak 23, Parak Kaf Gimel, the fall of Tyre at a specific time in history. This is now worldwide catastrophes over millennia. With the Churban of the first Beis HaMikdash, there will be an unraveling of world order. There'll be unraveling of morality. There'll be an unraveling of ethics. There will be hate, war, and this will lead up eventually to the complete unraveling, which is Gog and Magog, at the end of which we will have the Achros Hayomim, the end of days. We'll have Mashiach. We'll have a Beis Hamikdash. Population centers will be emptied. Neighbors and families will separate and cut off one another. Lo Aleinu, these things we've seen, whether we've seen it in the Crusades, in Shemoniki, Hitler Yamach Shemam, the Nazis Yamach Shemam v'Zechram, the selection process where families are separated and cut off from one another. Life will become distorted instead of simple and wholesome. We're watching, this has happened for many generations, but we are watching the complete unraveling of a normal, simple, and wholesome society. For those who read the news over the last few days, specifically yesterday, Dr. Seuss has become an evil person. It's this week in Tuesday in America is the Read Across the Country Day, something like that, where schools encourage children to read books. And it usually is done on Dr. Seuss's birthday to commemorate Dr. Seuss, who wrote so many wonderful books that children grew up with. And it created certain, psychologists have written about Dr. Seuss, it created a certain open-mindedness to Dr. Seuss's books about children thinking about different things, thing one, thing two, if you still remember Dr. Seuss. But his books were mind openers for young children. They were wholesome. They were simple. And in Loudoun County, Virginia, the school board canceled, they culture canceled Dr. Seuss because of certain racial undertones. I don't know what racial undertones there were in Dr. Seuss. I certainly, when I was a child, read Dr. Seuss. My wife and I continue to read Dr. Seuss to our grandchildren. I don't become a bigot because I read Dr. Seuss, but nevertheless, in Loudoun County, they cut Dr. Seuss out because of racial undertones. And the president of the United States signed a proclamation. Every year, a proclamation is signed for this read a day. And yesterday, he signed a proclamation for today. Every proclamation talks about Dr. Seuss. Biden decided that he's leaving Dr. Seuss out of the proclamation, racial undertones in Dr. Seuss. So Dr. Seuss was culture canceled yesterday by Biden, and therefore Seuss has no reference in the proclamation that kids should read books today. Or even though there are pictures of Obama and his wife praising Dr. Seuss when the 8 years that Obama was president, he signed proclamations for the Read a Day in America, which praised Dr. Seuss. And there are pictures with Obama, Mrs. Obama, with children wearing Dr. Seuss costumes. So for 8 years of Obama, Dr. Seuss was a wonderful thing for children. And now, 4 years after Obama, we now understand that the President of the United States cut out something that was wholesome, something that was simple, cancel culture. We'll deal with that in a moment. But this is the moral decay. People have gone completely insane. And where does this come from? Where does all this moral decay? Where does this insanity come from? Oh, it comes from Trump. No, it comes from Obama. No, it comes from Theodore Roosevelt. No, it comes from Abraham Lincoln. No, Rav Hutner in a mimer explains that there are different people that bring things into the world, but the chaos that occurs in the world and the destruction that occurs in the world all have its roots in the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash, which ended the normal, wholesome world order where Jews were the center focus of religion, and the Beis Hamikdash was the center of serving Hashem, and Jerusalem was God's city, and Eretz Yisrael was God's chosen land. With the destruction of the land, destruction of the Jerusalem, the exile of the Jewish people, the destruction of Beis Hamikdash ended the world order, and there's a downward trend ever since then until we witness what we're seeing today. So again, populations centers will be emptied, neighbors and families will be separated and cut off from one another. Life will become distorted instead of simple and wholesome, and God will scatter people to regions that have been sparsely inhabited. So this is the subject of chapter 24 in Yeshaya, the unraveling of the world order. And as Rav Schwab explained, this is not one period of time. It's not a prophecy about this will happen at this time. This is a prophecy that of worldwide catastrophes over millennia. So the first passage on page 178, we read, Hine Hashem bokeh ka'oretz, ubolka, ve'iva faneh vehefetz yoshveh, verse 2. We flip from 178 to 180. V'hoya cha'om kakohen ka'eved ka'donov ka'shifka kigevirta ka'kone ka'moche ka'malve ka'love ka'nosha no'oshebo. English, page 179. As with people, so with the priests. As with the slave, so with his master. As with the maidservant, so with her mistress. As with the buyer, so with the seller. As with the lender, so with the borrower. As with the creditor, so with the one who owes him. What is this pasuk describing? It's describing two people on two ends of a transaction. First, you have two people at two different statuses. The pasuk begins by saying the people and the Kohen, the slave and his owner, the maid with her owner, the buyer and the seller, the lender, the borrower, the creditor, and the person who owes him. What is the pasuk telling us? The pasuk is saying that the world is going to come to a point where there'll be no statuses left. There'll be no statuses in the sense that, before we go to the Gemara, there's no statuses in the sense of the equality movement. We see that today. There's nothing wrong with believing that people are created equal, okay? But we know that that's not true either. I mean, from a spiritual vantage point, we understand that people are given different neshamas, and they're given different capabilities, and they're given different tasks to accomplish in life. And we're going to see that today in the Ramchal. People are given different jobs and different tasks. And everybody, when they accomplish their task, is equal to the other person. If a person has this task and he accomplishes X, and another person has a different task and he accomplishes Z, they're equal. Even if X is much more difficult than Z, we're going to see the Ramchal is going to tell us today, God gives out the jobs. He decided to give someone job X in his life and someone else job Z in his life. And if the person who got job X was given job X, it means that God gave him the capabilities to do X. And if God chose another person to do job Z, it's because he gave him the capabilities to do Z. Z and X are two different jobs. One is X can be more complicated than Z in certain areas. Z can be more complex than X in certain areas. And God chose the neshamas to do what's needed to be done. So at the bottom line, X may be much more complicated than Z. And a person does his best to get to finish X, and he doesn't finish. And the person who has Z does his best, and he finishes Z. The person who finishes his task is on a higher madrega than a person who had a more difficult task but didn't finish it. Because if he had a more difficult task, God gave him all the tools to finish it. And if he didn't finish it, it's because he didn't use all his tools. Whereas the person who got the Z task, it may not have been as complicated as X, but he was given tools only to accomplish Z. He accomplished Z. He's on a higher level than the person who didn't finish his X task. So the Rabbanu Shalom created different neshamas, put it in different people, gave them different tasks to accomplish in their life. And that's on the Ruchnius level. And so, for example, when we talk about Yosef, was Yaakov, what was Yaakov's problem? Yaakov didn't understand that there's a problem when you treat one son differently than another son. The Gemara talks about this in Megillah. But what Yaakov didn't understand, that he could be stirring the hot pot by giving Yosef Eksonas Pasim. You need to understand that children, adults, people have different qualities, and we can't kill their qualities for the sake of equality. We're going to put down certain people with great qualities so that other people who don't have those qualities should not feel discriminated against. So we're going to equalize everybody. We're going to dumb down everybody. This person who has a certain talent should not fully develop his talent because the kid sitting next to him doesn't have that talent and he may feel bad. So let's equalize the whole classroom and make sure that nobody excels and make sure that everybody's on the same level. And if you think I'm joking, I am not joking. There are school boards across the United States, and there's a very infamous one in California. I forgot what city it's in, where report cards are not given out with grades, A, B, C, no more report cards, because the children that get A's and the children that get C's, when they talk about it with each other, the kid that got a C is going to feel demoralized because someone else got an A. But maybe he got an A because he worked at it, and you got a C because you didn't work at it. Maybe. It could be that the C is a child with special needs and he needs a special classroom. But there are now these school boards where the only thing the parents get home is a note. There's no grades of anything. The parents get a note. Your child is doing really well. We're happy to have him in the class. Your child is doing well, and we'd like to see him do a little better, whatever the note says, but we're not grading anything. Kids are not comparing grades anymore because we're going to equalize the whole classroom. This is what this pasuk is talking about. Yeshaya is prophesizing about a time where you'll no longer differentiate between Yid and a Kohen. What do you mean you don't differentiate? A Kohen gets the first aliyah. A Kohen gets to bench. A Kohen gets his hands washed by a Levi. Discrimination. Why should a Kohen get the first aliyah? I want the first aliyah. I'm a bigger Talmud Chacham than the Kohen, and I want the first aliyah. Right? So there's discussions about this in the Gemara, but that's the takana. Kohen gets the first aliyah. Who made him God? Why? Because he was born to a father who's a Kohen, so he should get the first aliyah. Because he was born to a father that's a Kohen, I, Levi, should wash his hands before he dochens. What kind of discrimination is that? People are born in different statuses. And so the pasuk now says that as the moral decay takes over, the Hebrew is much more powerful than the English. The Jewish people will deem themselves exactly like Kohanim. There's no difference. We're not going to give a Kohen special covet. Ka'eved kadonov, a servant and a master, the same. There's no such thing as servants and masters. Kashifra kagvirta, a maid and the maid's owner, no difference. Everyone's equal. Kakona kamocha, the buyer and the seller, everyone's the same. Kalmalva kalova, the lender and the borrower, all the same. Kanosha, kashanosha, no. The creditor and the person who owes the money, everything's the same. There's no difference between people whatsoever on any level. This begins the moral decay of people not understanding that while equality is important in the way we treat people. We don't insult people, we don't embarrass people, we don't harm people, we don't hurt people. But there's a point where we understand a person is a Talmud Chacham, a person is a Kohen, and the halacha tells us that people are to be treated differently. We stand up for some people, we don't stand up for other people. We wash a Kohen's hands, we don't wash other people's hands. So on page 181, the Art Scroll in its commentary quotes a Gemara. According to the Talmud, Shabbos, Kuf Yud Tes Amud Beis, this verse alludes to one of the causes of the destruction of Yerushalayim. In this pasuk, Yeshaya is prophesying about one of the reasons that will cause the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash and the destruction of Jerusalem. The Gemara says, "Lo chorva Yerushalayim el b'shvil shehushvu katan kagadol." That's the words of the Gemara. Jerusalem was destroyed because its inhabitants did not differentiate between the great and the lowly. I don't know if I would use the word lowly here, but there's a difference between a Kohen and a non-Kohen. And people will come to the point, and it will result in the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. They will not differentiate between people. And today is the Kol Hamona. It is the blast that's being heard in the streets and around the world. We don't differentiate between people. Everything is acceptable. Transgenders are acceptable. Ezechel Hashem, we're witnessing in America, where a woman by the name of Rachel Levine, who was a man and now is a woman, is about to become, Biden nominated her to be the Assistant Secretary of Health. And this is a big thing. Oh, we're going to have a transgender as the Assistant Secretary of Health. So we're not going to differentiate between people. That's a good thing. It depends what are you talking about. What are you talking about? You have a justice system. And in the justice system, we don't discriminate between a black defendant, a white defendant. We don't discriminate against any defendants. But in terms of what a tachlis of a human being is, if you're in front of a Beis Din, if a Talmud Chacham is in a din Torah with someone who's not a Talmud Chacham, we don't apply the Choshen Mishpat. The Talmud Chacham has to win because the Talmud Chacham, even though the not Talmud Chacham is supposed to get money. We're talking about an area where the halacha guides us how to deal with people. But there's still a difference between a Talmud Chacham and not a Talmud Chacham. And there's a difference between a Kohen and a Yisrael and a Levi. So what does it really mean when the Gemara says that this is one of the reasons for the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash? We didn't differentiate between different levels of people. Deference was not shown by unlearned persons to Torah scholars. No kavod Talmud Chacham. Okay, so what? So you know something. Big deal. What kavod do I have to have for you? Everyone's equal. By children to their parents, which is one of the signs of Mashiach. The Gemara, the Mishnah, Gemara talk about one of the signs of Mashiach is Ben, Mored, Ba'aviv, Kam Ba'aviv, Isha, Bita, Ba'ima. The Gemara and the Mishnah talks about children will stand up against their parents, Lord Elena, what we see today. Why are children standing up against their parents? Why is chutzpah yazge? The words of the Gemara, in a time of Mashiach, chutzpah will be rampant. What does this chutzpah come from? Because parents and children have become equal. Everything you want to do in your household, you first discuss with your children. Your children have an equal input into what you want to do in your household. Mama and Papa sit down with the children and discuss how to do something in the household, how the household is going to run. So what have we done? We have stopped and destroyed the parent-child relationship, and we've become friends with our children. And the psychologists, or many psychologists, talk about we need to be friends with our children so that they feel on an equal level with us. And if they feel on an equal level with us, they'll be more open with us and they'll discuss more things with us. Whereas if we're parents from the other generation and they are children of the new generation, we create the generation gap, they won't want to talk to us. So if we become their equal, we come down to their level, we're all friends, let's talk. This was one of the reasons of the destruction of Beis Hamikdash. And as Rav Schwab said, this is not a prophecy that occurred in one time. This is the unraveling of a world order that occurred over millennia. And part of the world order is in the 10 Commandments. You shall honor your father and mother. And there's a pasuk that says, Ish imo v'ovav tiro. A man should have fear. We're not talking about you're going to beat up your kid, chas v'shalom. Talking about a child has to have a healthy fear a reverence for his father and his mother. There's 2 mitzvahs in the Torah. 2 of the 613 mitzvahs, Kabedes Avicha V'Simecha Ish Imay Vavativo. It doesn't say you should become your child's friend. You should be his parent. Children need parents. One of the reasons for the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash is this. Deference was not shown by children to their parents or by the young to the old. And this, as Rav Schwab said, is something that unraveled over time. And it gets worse and worse and worse and worse. This unraveling of the world order known during the first Beis Hamikdash has taken millennia to unravel, and today we're witnessing the chaos that was wrought upon us by the destruction of the first Beis Hamikdash. But Amirat Hashem, as we continue in this perek, we're going to get to the good news also of the Jewish people's salvation at the end of the war of Gog and Magog.